David, can you tell us about your research?
Yes, so we've been working for a number of years really on the space where clinical trials meet real-world data. So we've looked at trials and their representativeness. We've used methods to calibrate trials to make them more representative. We've looked inside trials to try and find patients who've got multiple conditions, multimorbidity and clinical frailty. So that's really, and all of that's been about trying to understand how can we take this really precious resource that is the randomised controlled trial and then squeeze as much out of it as we can to try and inform our treatment decision making.
Are you doing this on trial design, to optimize trial design, or are you looking at studies that have already been completed to understand how to squeeze more data out of it?
So we've been working really exclusively with already published trials, or already completed trials, using a combination of individual participant data from Vivli when we can get it, and when we can't, we combine that with aggregate level trial data. But some of our findings, I think, do have implications for trial design. So, for example, we've done some work developing a risk prediction model for dropout from trials. We've shown that there are actually substantial numbers of people in clinical trials who have multimorbidity and who have frailty that I think should give us some thought about how we analyse trials and how we report them, to try and get as much information as we can about these particular groups of patients.
So addressing sort of the generalizability issue for specific subgroups.
Exactly. So usually when I talk to people about trials in multimorbidity and frailty, I say that people are underrepresented but not absent. And you can make two mistakes. You can say trials are perfectly representative, we can just naively take their results and apply them to any population. That's one mistake. But another mistake, I think, is to dismiss trials and say, oh, trial participants, they're all very healthy. Well, actually, no, they're not. There's really substantial numbers of people who have got a significant degree of clinical frailty and a significant degree of multimorbidity. And particularly if we start to meta-analyse and bring together data from lots of trials, we can start to make reasonably confident statements about how we think these drugs are going to work in these sicker people.
Yeah, that's interesting. As our population gets older, I think in all countries, it becomes more important that we do have evidence about this growing proportion of our population. Though it's probably a selected sample again of the very frail.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's right. I think the very sickest group, and in fact, when we published it, that's exactly what we showed. I'm going to draw some graphs in the air, but if you could imagine that if that was the kind of distribution of counts of coexisting diseases in the population, and then the trial is shifted over. So the very highest, the very sickest groups, they're definitely missing from the trials. But there are a substantial proportion of those in the middle. And I would argue that it's those in the middle that doctors are most uncertain about. Nobody is going to start someone on preventive therapy who's very severely ill from, for example, a metastatic cancer that's spread all over. But it's these kind of liminal, marginal cases. You know, this person's a bit older, they're a bit frailer, they're on these other medications, what should we do? And I think that alongside pharmacoepidemiology and routinely collected healthcare data, trials have got something to offer in that space.
So the general issue here seems around heterogeneity of treatment effect and the applicability of trial data to individual patients of whom everyone is unique and special. I recently had a conversation with an editor of a major medical journal, and I asked, why is it that we so prioritize generalizability of study results, almost to the exclusion of applicability for individual patients, right? So let's say that two trials really had the same mean effect. But one had, I'm trying to think of sort of the benefit under the curve is much larger. Like it serves more people in ways that we can target than another study but the mean is the same, and you know, NP is like way over 0.05, right? So a journal might say, well, that's not worth publishing because it's not generalizable, and it's like, well, why are we so predicating on generalizability and sort of abstract knowledge when I think what patients are really looking for and clinicians like we both are does it work for this patient? But what are your thoughts about that?
I think that's a really good question, and I think probably the biggest answer is tradition. That's why I've done that. But I think it's interesting. I got this slide where I say what is a clinical trial, and I show a picture of some green unroasted coffee beans and a kind of nice cappuccino. And we treat clinical trials as if they're a nice cappuccino, as if they're this consumer-ready product. I think they're more like some green unroasted beans. And what would be great to see would be for trial reports to include estimates of heterogeneity of treatment effect. You know, those could be in an appropriate form to be machine readable, and then you can take those out and you can combine the data however you think is most appropriate to try and say, well, what do I think the likely efficacy is in this group? How do I bring in routine data to tell me, for example, about competing risks and adverse events, to arrive at the best information that we can get based upon the data in its entirety, while still benefiting from the kind of the magic of randomization?
Yes. I would push that even further and say that some of the inputs to the heterogeneity is more than just the sort of inherent variability in the patient. There are system level effects.
Yeah, absolutely.
And why is it that we might not explicitly characterize those as well?
Yeah.
And so that you're simulating, right? You're simulating, and if we want to pull in the term digital twins, we can, if we wish to. But, you know, here's a trial, and the trial is in a specific context which we have operationalized. Yeah. And here you are a patient in your context, and if we kind of ran you through the trial, what would happen? Yeah. And then it wouldn't just give us the mean, it would be like, here's the distribution, and you're right there, right? And that would be useful. That would be useful to us as clinicians. Yeah. And so I think this whole, you know, I think we have to ask, like, what are we doing with publication? And what is it that we're putting forth as science versus practice? Yeah.
I mean, arguably, the traditional clinical trial report that goes in the New England Journal of Medicine or JAMA or something like that, is it really the best way to report trials? Wouldn't we be better with something a bit more like the results section in clinicaltrials.gov, but actually much richer, and maybe some kind of opinion piece pointing to that, and then we could incorporate all of these things that you're talking about. And to come back to that, I completely agree. To solely focus on patient characteristics and forget about everything all round about it, you know, how was the person diagnosed? Yeah. Because the more diagnostic uncertainty you've got, you know, the less we can expect the drug to be efficacious, you know. So these kind of real other kind of applicability issues, I completely agree.
And with AI, we can start to tease those sort of multiple impacts, apart. And I would say that, at least one journal editor, major journal, is thinking about how we share clinical trial results. And that's, something that drives how we're thinking in Vivly. That there is reuse and reuse for what kinds of purposes. So really excited to think through some of these.
Absolutely. And I think that, I mean, trialists do a wonderful job. Running a randomized control trial is an extremely challenging thing.
Very hard. Very hard.
I think I've spent most of my career doing secondary data analysis, so I'm very grateful to them. But I think that to think about a kind of single trial and a single report influencing practice is probably the wrong way to think about it. That trial is part of an ecosystem of a wider set of trials, and as well kind of routinely collected data and other sources of information. Even, for example, Bayesian prior elicitation.
Mm-hmm.
That can be another source of thinking about how we might expect treatments to work in real world settings.
So how do you see Vivly, and maybe tell us a little bit about your experience in using Vivly and how it was, and would you come back again and use it? Maybe reflect on that, and then just to put a pin on it as well, is like where might you see the type of data sharing that Vivly is doing feeds into this new world that we're co-imagining here.
So my experience of Vivly has been very positive. I come from a background of routinely collected healthcare data. So coming to that world so I was used to trusted research environments, I was used to application processes, running analysis, requesting to have results out and things like that. So I've found working in Vivly great. The turnaround times have been fast, and the turnaround for results has been excellent. Recently we had a paper under review at a major journal, and they asked for a very quick turnaround, and Vivly was wonderful about that. So flexible. We've learned a lot. We've learned about the standards in terms of terminology and data structures inside the world of industry-funded trials. I wish I'd known the SDTM abbreviation before we started. So I would say it's really useful to learn about that.
Okay.
We've kind of thought carefully about how we handle the different patterns of anonymisation. So one of the first things that we do now with the data is we create our own interactive data dictionary inside Vivly, so that we can kind of sort of rapidly see, what variables have been redacted or reduced in different ways. And we get, particularly, we've got over 120, 130 trials. So when you're analysing and harmonising that many trials together, you want to be able to look at all of the data at the same time. So we're able to do that. Okay. That's quite cool. Another thing is the version of clinicaltrials.gov produced by the Clinical Trial Transformation Initiative.
Yes.
We compare the results that we produce to the results that are available in that in a machine-readable format as a kind of test on the quality of our analysis. So that's something people need to think about. Another thing to step back a little bit is people need to think about reuse. We do meta-analysis. You could do a one-stage meta-analysis where you put all the individual patient data together and draw a conclusion from that, or you can do two-stage meta-analysis where you analyse each trial. I think we need to have a think about which is the best. I favour the latter, the two-stage, because it really allows for better transparency and better reuse. So when we publish our results, we make those trial-level results available.
I see.
So we can't provide a path into Vivly for people. They need to go through the standard process. But if they want to look at the second step of our analysis and they want to change it or reuse it, or some new trials come in from a different platform, then they're able to do that. But that's not appropriate. That's not appropriate for every study. But I think that's something that's worth thinking about for people as well. Yeah,
interesting. Sort of this notion of a living systematic review.
Exactly. And thinking about if you change the assumptions in the way that you could analyse something, it's a bit more robust for that.
Wonderful.